the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
This is Lord, this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 261. One thing. Oh, no, that's not it. My copy didn't copy again. The civil right feminists hate the most. But people are starting to understand this. That was last week's show. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, who has to have at least one technical difficulty for show. Here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks, Badger-in-Chief Allison Tiemann, and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson, to wade through the sludge of feminist claims about how our criminal justice system handles sexual assault allegations. We have a full house tonight, guys, so this should be an interesting show. But before... Huh?
I said,
Mm-hmm.
And I will second that comment. Mm-hmm.
And we can bring in UK statistics because we have someone from the UK.
Yay. And,
all of this is relevant to our interests.
It is. It is. And now, feminists are mad about not getting enough convictions for sexual assaults, but they really wanted to get more convictions for sexual assault. They should start considering when women do it. Then they would get a lot more convictions there. Women will readily admit they did stuff and think it's okay. But before we get into all that, we got to do what we got to do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage, at least our supporters, to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. So there we go. Feminists claim that only 1% of sexual assaults lead to a conviction. According to the article we're about to read, this is a serious problem that can be blamed on the process of investigation, and they have ideas on how to change that process to increase that number. Let's take a look at how they support this narrative and see if you can spot their two major fundamental mistakes. The first one should be readily available at the beginning of the article, right there under the headline. 1% of sexual assaults lead to a conviction.
It's telling that they're saying sexual assault rather than the R word. I mean, we're still live on YouTube, so I don't know if I can call the R word without jeopardizing our monetizability.
I don't monetize the HBR Talk shows.
I live in one of those countries, one of those many countries, where rape is a crime with which only men can be charged. Some time ago, during most of Honey Badger Radio's tenure, if I can call it that, rape is something with which only men can be charged, and this is something that often happened. Feminists and feminist adjacent peoples would say 95% of people charged with rape are men, and I'd be there going, only women can be charged with rape. Only men can be charged with rape. So how are you doing this exactly? What's
the 5%?
Yeah. That's a good question.
You say, actually, most people who get raped are men, largely because of the prison system. And they'd go, well, who's doing the rape? It's men, isn't it? Hello, Joe Rogan. And then we go, well, the only people who can be charged with rape are men. So you're here saying that 90% of the people charged with rape are men. And I'm here going, well, by definition, by legal definition, the only people who can be charged with rape are men, so it should be 100%. So where are you finding this 10% of people who aren't men but are still being charged with rape? What exactly the fuck they are doing? Something involving thorns or some shit.
What's interesting about the prison system is feminists, when they say that it's men doing it, they're lying. Like, yes, the men's prison system only houses men, but women are part of the staff. And guess where most of the sexual misconduct is in prisons? It is not between inmates. It is between staff, right? Like
you have to.
It is between staff and inmates, right? So you have these staffers that are taking advantage of an inmate's captivity. You cannot claim that these inmates are in a position to consent. If this was your boss in the workplace, like if I worked for a man, I don't, but if I worked for a man, and I came out and said, oh, I've been having this sexual relationship with my male boss, feminists would go through the roof instantly, that I was being taken advantage of, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of whether I had made this decision myself, even if I sought out the relationship. Because you can't consent to your boss. Your boss has a power dynamic that puts you in a position where you're unable to consent. That is, in fact, in their survey methods, when they survey people on sexual victimization. And they ask if you've been victimized. They ask if you've been raped. They don't say, have you been raped? Have you ever had sex with someone? Have you ever had sex because your boss made you do it? Have you ever had sex because someone offered you a promotion? Have you ever had sex because someone offered you extra pay at work? Like those kind of questions. So you call that rape when a woman experiences it in the workplace. Right? And you call it rape when a female prisoner experiences it in the prison system. Most sexual misconduct in the male prison system is female staff perpetrated sexual misconduct, sexual exploitation of prisoners.
And
Hey,
inmate on inmate rape is 2.5 times. I checked last time. It's 2.5 times more prevalent in female prisons than male prisons.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that and I believe the community rape probably still like the community sexual assault of men still eclipses prison rape. But the reason why there's such a high rate of male victims of other male inmates is because there's just a large prison population of a male prison population. Female prison population is smaller. But when you look at the community stats, I mean they're basically equal in the last year. So yeah, it's if they did include women, they would probably increase that number. And I actually wonder if, because this is interesting, because I've been sort of watchdogging these organizations that supposedly deal with sexual assault, exploit sexual assault usually to make money. But for one example is Rain. At one point, they did a PSA in which they described that in a year there would be X many pregnancies caused by rape, and they used it. They basically just used a rate at which sexual intercourse is likely to result in sex. Like one instance of sexual intercourse is likely to result in pregnancy, not sex. Sorry. And then they applied it to how many instances of forced sexual assault were happening in the U.S. in the year. And then they found out like maybe 60,000 rape babies. The only problem is that they lumped the male victims. So 60,000 women pregnant with babies as a result of having women being raped. The only problem is that they lumped the male victims in with the female victims. So that was a lot of pregnant men, like 30,000 pregnant men.
That's pretty bad.
And I sent them a message. I don't think they ever fixed it, because why bother, right? When they're drumming up the hysteria to get the coffers full of filthy lucre. But the reason why I mention this is, on average, less than 1% of sexual assaults ever lead to conviction. I wonder if they're actually including the male sexual assaults in this to plump up the figures and make them look worse. Because basically 0% of sexual assaults of men end in conviction.
Well, we'll take a look at the beginning of the article. They start out by saying rape is the easiest violent crime to get away with in the United States, which I think is a load of bull. I think the easiest violent crime to get away with in the United States is police brutality. Like, we hear... I'm not kidding. Like, and I know people are going to be like, well, yeah, but you're an ANCAP. Yes, I am. And that does partly affect it. But from what I've noticed, like, there's a lot of under the radar stuff that happens. Like, we get told about it when somebody gets shot, if that person is black or some other minority, if that person is female, if they feel like they can really make you sympathetic. But there were two news stories real close together that happened that we talked about on HBR News a few years ago. One of them was talked about nationally, and probably would have become a big national news story if the locals had not told Al Sharpton to fuck off and go home, which is one of the reasons I love Dayton. But because they basically were like, we do not need you, get out of here. We are having our conversation with the police, right? And that was the Walmart shooting here in Beaver Creek. And I say here, I'm not in Beaver Creek, but I'm close to Beaver Creek. So I shop at that Walmart all the time. And it was a dumb situation. The police were given false information by a caller to 911 who should have known better. They thought they were coming into an active shooter scenario, and the reason they fired on the guy was because he, in an active shooting scenario, what he said would be threatening and crazy. But he thought he was just walking around the store with a toy, because it was a pellet gun. It wasn't a real gun. And he is just on the phone with his girlfriend, and the cops come along and start pointing their guns at him, and he clearly thought he was going to reassure them by telling them the gun wasn't real. And that destroyed the situation. Immediately the cops shot him because they didn't have time to find out if he was going to shoot more people. Well, he hadn't shot anybody.
Right.
The caller said he did. The caller said he was reloading, and pointing it at children and everything. Like, it was really stupid. And
did that caller go to jail?
Seriously.
They never covered any more of that in the news. But I bet the military handled it because the caller was military. So I would bet that the caller suffered some sort of penalty. I don't know what it would be, but it was. I was thinking too, like, oh, is this somebody with PTSD? No, it was just a dipshit, just a fucking dipshit. But at the same time, there was a similarly ridiculous circumstances incident in Salina, Ohio, with somebody that some of my family members knew. He was friends with my brother. And so my family has a friend who was shot by police. And no recourse for his family, no recourse for any of his people, right? The reason was because the court determined that the officer had reason to shoot. And it was a situation where, the guy had a series of unfortunate events that left him walking from his car to the location he had been driving to. He had his gun, he was open carrying his gun. It was not in his hand, so he was not holding it. He wasn't pointing it at anything. It was actually in a dumb position. It was tucked into his pants because he didn't have any place else to put it. But you could see it clearly, so well that some lady called the cops from inside her house. And she did the same thing. She made up a bunch of bullshit about how scary he was. And, like, he was just a guy walking down the street shirtless with a gun stuck in the back of his pants that anybody could see, so anybody knew he had it. And the cop that approached him was on leave there's a psych eval you have to go through if you've been involved in a violent incident. And in this situation, this cop should not have been on duty. He had been involved in when you go through a violent incident where you have to make snap decisions and you have to either use violence or defend against violence, like avoid violence, it creates, there's a bunch of brain chemistry that happens that creates, I would almost call it like a temporary mini PTSD. Like, I've been through this a bunch of times, right? And you are on a different level of awareness and alertness and sensitivity to the potential for violence and the need for you to respond with violence for a period of time after this happens, right? So your actions toward another person in a scary situation or a heightened stress situation in that time period will be different than they would have been if you had not experienced violence prior to that time period, like really closely prior to that time period. So you're more likely to, like, a good example of this is one of my brother's friends, I shouldn't call him my brother's, my friend, one of my childhood friends, because we used to hang out all the time and razz each other all the time. We had this game going on when we were young where we would, my parents had a big house, and we would hide around the corner and jump out and scare each other. Like, and it was just fun. So we did this all the time, right? But about maybe 3 weeks after the first time my female perpetrator assaulted me, and that was the time that she literally beat me into submission. Like, I literally was subdued. I couldn't move. I was so exhausted from the fight that I couldn't move. Right? 3 weeks later, he's hiding in a closet. He jumps out, and I clocked him right in the jaw. Like, I didn't punch people growing up. That wasn't my thing. Like, I was the person that would say nasty things to you in a fight, or I would try to be diplomatic and prevent the fight. But I never threw the first punch, except for that time I did. Like, he yells, boo, and I, like, just got him really good. And I was so embarrassed. I couldn't understand why I did that, because we jumped out at each other like that all the time. Man, now I understand, right? But back then, no, right? So this cop shows up to deal with the situation that this woman has reported on the phone. And, the guy who was friends with my brother that I didn't know him, he is given an order that he can't comply with. He's told to put his hands in the air and drop the gun. Well, the gun's in his pants. So he's confused because he doesn't want to reach for it in front of the cop who is pointing a gun at him. And so he just kind of like stood there. He didn't have his hands on the gun. He didn't put his hands over his head. And the cop shot him. And then, again, there's a situation where I'm not sure that cop would have done that if he had not recently been involved in a firefight. And I'm not sure his instructions would have been so stupid if he hadn't been involved in a firefight. But he should have been accountable for responding to that incident, because he shouldn't have been on duty, and he shouldn't have agreed to be on duty. And the department was responsible for that. And the department was never held responsible for the death of my brother's friend. And just to be clear, that's not the same guy that I punched when I was startled. I didn't know this guy. He was part of the stuff going on with my brother's band. But to say that rape is the easiest crime to get away with in the United States, you have to ignore the fact that state violence, in order to hold state violence the state accountable, or operatives of the state accountable for state violence, you have to appeal to the state. And the state can tell you no.
But Karen...
The state can tell you to fuck off.
Sorry, I just had like a 3-hour conversation with Karen today. So
it's okay.
But Karen,
you call me Karen. That's like
no. Hannah,
we're all Karens here.
Yeah.
But Hannah, rape happens to white women.
Yeah. Therefore,
it happens.
It's a bigger deal. One. It's a much bigger deal, right?
Yeah.
So let's see. We got into the first sentence.
We got into the first sentence. Also, the other thing is that that they're screwing around with numbers here.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. First of all, depending on where they're getting their rape numbers, they're probably getting it from surveys. Lauren, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from you.
It's the National Crime Victims Survey, the Justice Department's National
Crime Victims. Okay.
Yeah, so it is a survey of people reporting crimes they've experienced. So
that includes male victims.
Yeah.
That include male victims,
yes.
And why they have a woman on there, and I'm guessing that the mention of the fact that this number includes male victims, it won't happen. So they are using it to pad it. But I mean, I could be wrong. But the other thing is that this is a population survey. So this is people who say that they were sexually assaulted. So a lot of them don't ever come to the attention of the police. For whatever reason, they don't want to reveal this to the police. I'm guessing because a large portion of this is occurring within relationships. So it's probably occurring in a overall context of violence with a person that they may not want to go to jail. But the police can't prosecute a rape that they don't know about. And it's not fair to only look at the rate at which people reveal that they have been subject to something on a crime survey, and only for rape, not for the other crimes, because the other crimes also, people will reveal that they've had thefts or even burglaries or even assaults that they never took to the police. But that's not included here. So feminists will compare the rate at which people reveal on these surveys, on these crime surveys, with the rate at which these crimes, like how many convictions they have of these crimes in a year, only for rape. Every other crime, it's comparing the rate, how many people are accused or charges are laid by the police. So in the case of assault, in the case of theft, or in the case of burglary, charges are laid by the police are compared to how many convictions occurred. But rape is special. We compare how many people on a population survey say they were raped compared to how many rapes are charged in a year. It's completely disingenuous.
Well, I hereby report that which is unreported to refute your claim of your report of that which is hereby unreported. Checkmate, Alison.
Okay, and if you want to do the whole only the X%, like that only 99% of rapes go well, then you should compare to how many are how many false accusations are prosecuted.
Right.
Really?
Well, there's another thing.
I remind you of there is the unreported, and then there is the unreportable. Yes, you can tell me about all of those convictions that go. I mean, sorry, not convictions. Well, let's just say convictions that go unreported in countries where they can legally be reported, and I'm here to raise my hand and go, okay, well, what about those countries and those states in which it cannot be reported because it's unreportable, because there is no such crime? This is what pisses me off about people who say until 1993, it wasn't technically possible for a woman to report rape against her husband. And I sit there twiddling my thumbs for a few seconds and then go, okay, that's possible. I mean, we could look into the legality that goes behind that. But for how long has it not been possible for a husband to report rape against her wife?
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about the countries in which a man cannot report a rape against a woman for any reason. Even in the countries and states where it is recognized as a crime for a woman to rape a man, it's still not recognized as a crime for a wife to rape her husband. For exactly the same reasons you're talking about when you say until 1993 it wasn't possible for a wife to report rape against her husband. And this just throws people for a loop because they think they've got a checkmate when they say this shit about 1993, which was bullshit anyway.
Well, there were a couple of states.
And then you introduce a dimension that they absolutely never considered in their entire lives. Well, what's the situation for men? The situation. Yeah, you're making a comparison. You're making a comparison between X and Y. That requires knowing both.
There were a couple of states that had laws on the books that said you couldn't report rape against your husband. But at the same time, you could report rape under circumstances that didn't involve you fighting back, that didn't involve being forced against somebody who wasn't your husband. So in those situations, it's very hard in a marriage situation for the court to sort out whether there was consent or not. And in Ohio, I don't think we had that law. But our law here says that if you are going to try to get somebody convicted of rape, you have to have more evidence than just the word of the accuser.
And people talk about patriarchy, that is something that has existed for all of history, that a husband couldn't be charged with rape against his wife. Please tell me the first point in history in which a wife could be charged with rape against her husband.
Yeah, because you could charge men with rape in the 13th century. You could charge men with rape in the 12th century.
Technically, you could charge men with rape since they had courts.
Yeah, as long as there's been police and courts.
And the other thing is that what they failed to look at is even if the court says, yeah, this isn't our jurisdiction because we just can't untangle it,
right,
and we don't have the resources. So the resources were an issue for a long time. I mean, how are you you're gonna be pretty choosy about what you adjudicate over if you got a circuit court judge, who basically just walks around barefoot in the desert and appears every 3 years. And you're probably not going to put certain things to him or her to decide. So a lot of these rape cases, these genuine rape cases, they were dealt with through vigilante or posse justice. And they just go lynch the guy. And that's been the case probably throughout all of human history, judging by the way that more tribal cultures deal with rape now. And in the case where a husband raped his wife, maybe the judicial system didn't want to get involved because they didn't feel like they had the ability to untangle the knot. But I'm pretty sure it was quite likely her relatives would get involved. And also,
in Europe, the answer would have been a skimmington.
Yeah,
skimmington was a community action against the abusive partner in a couple, if the abusive partner was a man. Conversely, if the abusive partner was a woman, then they would shame the man for not being able to control her.
Yeah, but that would be extrajudicial. So they just completely discount the fact that not everything gets in front of a judge that people disapprove of.
Yeah.
And many things that they disapprove so strongly of, they will refuse to put it in front of a judge because the only thing that will give them a sense of closure is some man's neck broken off. That's it. Like a lot of these tribal people, they're not going to sit in front of a judge and allow them to decide what to do with a guy who's raped their daughter. No, they're going to have a 3-generation war.
Yeah,
to go kill
longer.
His whole tribe. Yeah.
Feminists also act like this only happens with sexual assault. Like people just don't report it because the system can't sort it out, or for other reasons. Like they'll say women won't report rape if it was in the context of prostitution or some other illegal activity. Well, guess who else doesn't report those crimes? If somebody breaks into my apartment right now, they're not going to get much because we don't have a lot of valuable stuff. We have a bunch of old shit, right? But let's say we had something we don't have. Like maybe we kept a lot of money in here for some stupid reason. Or we had some valuable family heirlooms like that were worth a lot of money, or something. And somebody broke in and stole that shit. Right? I would go straight to the cops. Right? I would have whatever documentation I could get my hands on, go straight to the cops. This happened. This person broke my door down. They stole my shit. Or somebody did this and I don't know who, if that was the case, and they would come in and they would investigate and there's all that, right? But what if it was drug money? What if I was a drug dealer? Would I do the same thing if somebody broke into my house and stole my drug profits?
Mm-hmm.
No, I would not go to the cops for that.
No.
The first thing they would ask is, where'd you get all that money? You don't have a job.
Mm-hmm.
Like how come you had $10,000 in your apartment and you don't work anywhere? You're on welfare. Like, you see, officer, it was a gift. Like, no, I'm not going to report that. So there's a shitload of crime that never gets reported to the police. Because it takes place in the context of illegal activities. But feminists are only sympathetic to victims of rape who are female, who don't report because the crime takes place in the context of illegal activities. They don't give a rat's ass about somebody who gets a beatdown because they live with a drug dealer who got robbed by a rival drug dealer or a rival gang member. Right? Those crimes don't get reported until somebody gets killed.
Yeah, no, I guess they think that karma's going to come back and snatch their ass and get them in some way, shape, or form. But that's not how it works or how it should work. Yeah, there's a real just they don't
Double
really
standard.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Double
And the other
fucking
thing
standard.
is, how many prostitutes, like, and what they're doing is they're appealing to the fact that prostitution is a victimless crime, except, prostitutes don't tend to be the best people in general.
Yeah.
That's an unfortunate truth. Like, I'm sure there's some wonderful prostitutes out there, but they tend to be involved in some pretty skeezy stuff.
Right.
Well, and then you also have the situation of keeping prostitution illegal facilitates the victimization of people who don't volunteer for the job.
Yes.
True enough, yes. But I think the overall point is that it's completely disingenuous to compare the rate at which people reveal that they are victims of rape, and also lump in all the male victims of rape with the female victims, and then compare that to the conviction rate. They don't do that with any other crime.
Mm-mm.
Well, here's the thing.
Okay.
In terms of, like, let's say it was 100% true that a big part of the reason rape is not prosecuted is because victims who could prosecute are not reporting their crimes, right? Like, to the system. That doesn't make the system responsible, all right? Feminists telling women that you shouldn't report because you're not going to get treated right when you go in and report, instead of telling women, in order to hold the criminal accountable, you're going to have to tough out the scrutiny of the system because you should be angry enough at what was done to you to fight that battle. Right? And that is more to blame than anything. If you make somebody afraid to go to the police and report a crime, then they're not going to go to police and report a crime. Now, is it possible that reform is needed in investigation? It is. It's possible. But I don't think it's as much of the problem as feminists make it out to be.
Definitely not. I mean, it's just such a convoluted situation when it comes to, situations of sexual assault, right? Because, you got to think about situations when this happens. I don't know, I can't say for sure, but I would venture to say that a lot of these cases happen when people are under the influence, right? And I think some of it, not all of it, but require a little bit of situational awareness. And God forbid you tell women that they maybe need to be a little bit more careful about what they're doing and where they are doing it and with whom.
Yeah.
That you can't do that. And so, when it comes to trying to get a victim or get a somebody charged for this supposed crime, things like that come into play. And if it doesn't work out in their favor, then they cry that, oh my God, the system didn't work out in my favor, so it's wrong and it's bad and it needs to be fixed. Well, no, maybe you just need to take a little bit of accountability for what happened to you. And I don't know, it's just not always what it is made out to be.
Yeah, it's not.
It's different insofar as with prostitution, the prostitutes themselves are these suppliers of the product that is being sold to the buyers, so to speak. Whereas with drugs, the mules are merely working for the kingpins, and this is largely the difference. With drugs, the kingpins merely give the same product to the mules, whereas with pimps, they're merely regulating the mules, if you can even call them mules.
Well, it's a service, not a product, so there's a little difference there. They're regulating the service.
Exactly, sex isn't illegal, but drugs are.
Yeah,
and this is the difference. Like, the only reason prostitution is even an industry is because the supply is being reduced through means other than legal means. And how is that even the case if sex isn't illegal? Like, we could solve the drug problem by just making these popular drugs legal. You know, we can even tax them if that's what you want to do. You know, it might bring about some kind of degeneracy, which might fix itself organically after a generation or two. But how do we fix the prostitution problem, given that sex is already legal? Yeah, it's a bit more complicated, isn't it? If you could just let men and women interact organically, naturally, without, I don't know what is it we're doing? What is it that the powers that be are doing to society that makes sex between men and women become a market that is controlled in the black market? That's where we come into it and go, maybe it's something to do with the demonization of a certain kind of sexuality,
right?
Namely men.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to take my stab in the dark at it, it would be that, you know, look at what we do. We incentivize women to procreate, right? And so, Jesus Christ, I already forgot where I was going with it. Go on.
All right, can we get to the article?
Yeah, I was gonna say when it really comes down to it, like, prostitution laws don't outlaw sex with prostitutes. They outlaw the exchange of currency,
right?
In response to it, which is really kind of convoluted. You're outlawing the exchange of currency for something that isn't illegal to do. It's always been a strange arrangement. But when it comes to and when it comes to allegations, a lot of times there's debate over, is it rape if somebody has sex with a prostitute and then doesn't pay her? Like, it's well, when you look at the history of rape laws and rape standards, the answer would be yes, because that's rape is theft. It is a form of theft of your sexual services. It's a violation of your bodily autonomy. So your fundamental property, your most baseline property, is your own body. You own it. You live in it, and nobody else is supposed to be able to take it away from you. So there is that, right? But when it comes down to it, this again is something that is only sympathized when it happens to female prostitutes. Very, very few organizations talk about the fact that it happens to male prostitutes. So,
because it very rarely does, because male sexuality is worth exactly fuck all.
Well, the thing is, it's more likely to happen because female patrons of male prostitutes aren't going to want to pay for something that they think is worth fuck all. Men will pay for something that they think is valuable. Women, you can't even get women to pay for something that they think is valuable, right? Like, if it was a possibility, women would show up to male prostitutes with coupons. Can I get 50% off? I'm not talking about your pants.
You are absolutely right about that. Women are the cheapest creatures on earth. I'm sorry, it's facts. Don't hate me. Don't hate me.
It's the truth.
It's just a fucking fact.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's not just because women don't value male sexuality. It's because women are always skinflints. Like, that's our
exactly.
It's in our nature.
Right. Right.
But in any case, like, and it's partly because, you know.
On that note, let's get into the article.
Yeah, that's it. But in any case, this use of the National Crime Victimization Survey. So we've looked at the first two fundamental errors. The first one is the error that only 1% of sexual assaults ever lead to conviction. Because we're talking about, when you say assaults, but you're talking about a survey, this is not stats on actual crime. This is self-reported, right? People saying, this happened to me. You never can be 100% certain that every person reporting to that survey is telling the truth. Right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you look at the questions, are they treating things as rape that the community doesn't think of as rape? And so are people reporting these things happened, but the reason they didn't report them to police is because they didn't feel like a rape victim? And that's, I can't emphasize enough, there is a significant difference between what feminists say about your ability to consent to sex with some alcohol in your system and how people behave in regard to sexual interaction with some alcohol in their system. And feminists only think that women can't consent with some alcohol in their system. If a man and a woman both have some alcohol in their system and they're both at the same level of intoxication, he's considered a rapist and she's considered a victim, even if they both consented. That's bullshit. So their mistakes there are, they're counting things as sexual assault that may not be sexual assault, and they're lumping male and female stats together, but now they're going to treat it as a problem that only exists for women.
Exactly. And if you take into account the fact that if you look at current statistics, women are the most, they are becoming more and bigger, like alcoholics, right? They are abusing alcohol at a higher rate than they ever really have in history. And so you have a bunch of drunk chicks under the influence, and they're not really sure of what's going on. And they run into these situations where they're not sure of what they're doing. So yes, the question of rape becomes questionable because they're not in their right mind. They're not making good decisions when they're in that state. But no, it's just, no, they're getting raped. Let's just blame the men. It's not.
Yeah, the gal that I went to college with that used to go to parties and get drunk and grab some guy by the t-shirt and drag him off into another room to have sex with him was totally a victim. Absolutely. Right. Yes, feminist. Right. But those guys who were even more drunk than she was, they were perpetrators.
They had way more agency than she did.
Yeah. And that's the problem. So you hear 23% of rape or sexual assaults victims, only 23% reported the crime to police. All right. What percentage of that 23% were women? Is the reason that the other 77% isn't reporting is because a large portion of them won't be taken seriously because of their sex? So if those do report, the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Database shows that only about 20% of reports lead to arrest. Right. And according to the nonprofit Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, RAINN, which analyzes the national data regarding sexual assault and rape, only half of arrests lead to a trial.
So we're talking about, of the 23% of the assaults that get reported, only 20% of those actually lead to arrest.
Mm-hmm.
And then even only half of those actually go to trial, where there's, someone who actually will listen to the facts of the case.
So
by
again,
by definition, they're just men's rights advocates, because all they're trying to do is advocate for their rights as men, and so they are. Let's convert this into an initialism. They're just MRAs. So they're just whining and complaining about shit that doesn't matter. and this is where I'm attacking both sides of the political spectrum, isn't it?
There you go. So I'm going to point out a few things about the 20% number here. I'm going to go back to the 7 years in hell case because, like, everything happened in that case. I'm telling you. One of the allegations, one of the demonstrably false allegations that 7 years in hell guy faced was rape. His ex went to the police. She filed a police report claiming that he had broken into her apartment and raped her. And she gave a day and a time when that allegedly occurred, right? She said she gave all the details. This is when that happened. Turned out that he was on video somewhere else. He was arrested. Well, they didn't call it an arrest. They called it bringing him in for questioning, right? But they kept him for 12 hours. And they interrogated him for 12 hours. They withheld his medicines, which they're not allowed to do. And they only let him go when his lawyer basically said, look, if you're not going to charge him, you have to let him go. Well, they didn't have anything, and he produced evidence of his innocence. So, obviously they had to let him go, right? So that was a false report. She reported again by changing her story, picked a different day. Oh, I had the day wrong. I forgot what day it was. And he got dragged in again for questioning. Technically, he wasn't under arrest, but he got dragged in again for questioning. And fortunately, again, he had a variety of receipts showing that he could not have committed the crime because he was elsewhere. And so she shopped around for another day. She changed her story a third time. And, he was dragged in again. And finally, his attorney said, we're going to sue if you don't stop this. There's obviously no credibility to this story. Once the accuser has changed the date and time repeatedly, you know that she's just shopping around for some time he can't account for. There's no actual physical evidence of sexual assault. There's no placement of him anywhere near her location. She has a restraining order against him. She kept a 30-day restraining order, temporary emergency restraining order going for a whole year by using continuances for the case, for the hearing. So she just kept pushing the hearing back. And that 30 days was 10 times as long as it was supposed to be. But in any case, that's an incident where a report can be said to not lead to arrest. Well, that report was false, right? And of course it never went to trial because that report was false. Right? But if it had been a different situation, right? So my last experience with this, and at the time I didn't know I was autistic, so I didn't know why I couldn't describe my perpetrators.
You're still not necessarily autistic, honey. You might just be normal.
No, I'm diagnosed. You know how many times I've been in the same room with you? If somebody asked, and I've watched your videos, I couldn't describe you right now, other than to tell your hair color. I've seen your face hundreds of times, and I couldn't describe you. I couldn't tell people what shape your nose is. I couldn't describe what kind of eyes you have. That's autism. That's one of the fun things about autism, right? So I go into if I go into that situation and describe that, right? I'm going to go into the police department. I'm going to say this happened to me, and there were 3 guys, and did you see their faces? Yes. What did they look like? I don't know. Now who's the cop going to arrest?
Right.
Is he going to go out and look for the guys with no faces? Like, there's a lot more investigation that has to take place before there can be an arrest. And if the victim, even trying to cooperate, cannot give the officer information, right? If the perpetrators used objects and didn't leave DNA, right? And things like that, if they don't have a license plate of the vehicle, they don't have a way to identify the vehicle. And it's to the degree that I reported when I was a security guard at a university, there was a building that was in two parts, had a breezeway in between the two parts of the building, that you could drive a car through. You weren't supposed to drive a car through. You had to get up on the sidewalk to drive a car through it, but you could drive a car through it. And somebody did, and almost ran me over. Called the cops, and I'm reporting it. I had all but the last digit on the license plate. Well, they couldn't identify the car without that last digit. Right, so in a situation with a and it was like, the only reason I had it was because I was reading it off into my walkie as they were driving away from me. They just drove way too fast for me to catch the last one. But in a situation where the crime was more serious, they would have tracked him, found a way to track him down, but it would have taken a lot longer. And it wouldn't have been enough, like if you didn't have the whole license plate and that was the only evidence, you'd have been SOL. Right? So there are plenty of situations where arrest doesn't happen because there isn't enough evidence to lead to who is the perpetrator. If you can't identify a suspect, who do you arrest?
Right.
Like, that's the first problem. The second problem is obviously some reports are false. Right? And then
it comes down to people who are able to describe a face purely through their imagination.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, eyewitness testimony is notoriously horrible. Unless it's, one-on-one, like it's first-person witness. I mean, and even then, you can get things completely wrong. Details,
yeah.
But, listen, if that's what you got, that's what you got. What else do you have to go on?
Yeah.
But,
well, and then you also have, this brings up another thing, right? So we get told that the overwhelming majority of rape is perpetrated by people that the victim knows. And that's based on criminal convictions. But here we're like, only 1 out of 5 reports to police leads to an arrest. What if that claim is bullshit? What if a significant number of people go to the police, report the crime, and then can't give enough evidence or information to identify the suspect?
Mm-hmm.
Because, I could at least, if somebody I knew commits the crime, I can at least say, this person by name did this to me, right? And even if I was going to falsely accuse somebody, which obviously I wouldn't want to do, somebody I know did this to me, like go in and say the person by name did this to me. You at least have that when the accused is someone the accuser knows. But when the accused is actually a stranger, and you don't have that evidence or that information, right? Then, again, like how are the police supposed to arrest someone if they don't know who to arrest? And then you only take a case to trial if you have a chance of conviction, right? And if you have a chance, you only have a chance of conviction if you have evidence that meets the standard. That evidence has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Prosecutors don't take cases to court to lose. So if you have an accuser who's uncooperative, if you have a situation where the evidence gathering doesn't net evidence that's going to demonstrate that the crime happened, or prove that the person who's accused was the perpetrator, they're not going to take it to trial. So it goes on. Most reliable data on conviction rates comes from a Justice Department study that analyzed convictions between 1990 and 2009. Well, they say most reliable data, but I'm kind of concerned, is it that it's the data they like the best or the data they consider the most reliable? They say the study concluded that rape trials end in conviction around 35% of the time. Taken together, this means that only about 8/10 of 1% of assaults, of accusations, correcting the article here, of accusations lead to a conviction. And then they start to make some admissions, right? The data here is admittedly murky. Murky? Like, are you kidding me? It's not even data. National studies don't consistently distinguish rape from sexual assault, an umbrella term that includes rape as well as other forced acts. Well, there's a reason for that. In some states, they don't have the label rape anymore. They just use the label sexual assault.
Oh, jeez. So it's just a fucking umbrella term.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because, listen, obviously, penis in vagina or vagina on penis, actual rape is a completely different category of a type of sexual assault than just, I brushed her boob in a way that she did. She thought I touched her tits. That's a completely different fucking thing, But no, what they do to boost their numbers is to lump them all together.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh God.
They're basically lumping everything from groping in with full-on forcible rape.
Right.
In order to get this. So.
Well, it's that vagina on penis doesn't count as rape, but finger through hair does count as rape.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's part of the problem. And then, of course, we still go back to, you look at that, right? And a woman will feel sexually assaulted and claim to be sexually assaulted if she thinks that it was on purpose when a man touched her butt.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That just because the train is packed like sardines and nobody is not touching and that guy's behind her with his back turned to her doesn't change the fact that it was deliberate and he was groping her. Right? It doesn't even matter if she doesn't know what part of his body touched her. Oh, it had to be his hand. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The woman will be like that. Men don't seem to have that attitude about it. And in fact, men will weather behavior that women will freak out about and call sexual misconduct.
Mm-hmm.
And I've watched this happen in circumstances where it was another woman's place to step up and defend him. She was married to him. But going to a Renaissance fair with a guy in a kilt is very enlightening. I will say that, because at a Renaissance fair, you're dealing with a lot of drunk women, a lot. Mead is it doesn't feel like you're getting drunk at all, right? It's very sweet. You don't taste a lot of alcohol in it, but the mead at the Ren is pretty alcoholic, and I have seen some pretty falling down drunk women do some pretty inappropriate shit that they would never tolerate if a man did it to them. And, walking up and touching somebody else's chest, walking up and touching somebody else's legs, walking up and reaching under somebody else's clothes without asking or without waiting for an answer. And, that guy's not going to go on a survey and say, I was groped, I was molested. Like, he's not going to do it. He was annoyed. He was embarrassed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she should have been thrown out. right? That chick should have been thrown out. That was inappropriate behavior. You can't act like that in here. Get the fuck out. But what ended up happening was, wife stood in between him and her and said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And she backed down because wife was bigger and stronger and carrying a battle axe. Peace tide, but it was a real battle axe. I like her. Anyway, so yeah, like that was the end of that. But you don't see that with the opposite sex. Like there weren't men just randomly reaching up women's skirts to see if they were real. Well, I mean, like, I don't know, the whole real Scotsman thing, no underwear and all that. It's not really a good excuse, but to see if they were real wenches.
I guess this might be the reason women wore long skirts for all of human history, as far as anyone can ascertain.
Yeah, underwear was not like underwear was an invention of modern society. Not modern as in today, but as in more technologically advanced society. The idea that you like have your layers of clothes are not about warmth, but about modesty and cleanliness. Yeah, but like honestly, that scene in Crocodile Dundee, for instance, where he goes up and grabs the crotch to see if the woman is a real woman, is funny because it would never happen in real life. It's funny because it's outrageous and inappropriate and nobody would ever tolerate it happening in real life. Would lead to the guy getting the shit beaten out of him, and then the cops would be called, and he wouldn't be able to press charges against his assailants because the cops would be like, "What the hell are you doing grabbing a woman's crotch?" But yeah. So murky my ass, right? This is not this. I can't even count this as data now. Like, they're to the point where they're counting things that only women report and then claiming that it is data on rape when it's actually data on a whole spectrum of things that may or may not have happened. That the lower down on the scale of inappropriateness that you get, or the lower down on the scale of violence you get in terms of the behavior, the more likely the behavior is going to get reported on the basis of the woman's feelings rather than the basis of the facts of the incident. And when they happen to men don't report them. But they're counting men's experiences in this, right? And what we're looking at here is a spectrum of things that men who are surveyed might answer, yes, these things happen to me, but they're not going to go to the cops. So the majority of these non-reports, the majority of the people that didn't go to the cops may have been men.
And to bring it back to Crocodile Dundee, just because you ban guns, and if you then report on knife crime and say, look how bad knife crime is, you can go ahead and say, well, that's not a knife, this is a fucking gun. You could go ahead and say, you could say something about knife crime or gun crime, but it all depends on what you've banned and what you haven't banned. And the same goes for rape. Like, rape with a penis is totally different from rape with a vagina. And we can sit here until the cows come home talking about that's not a knife, that's a gun, that's not a gun, that's a knife. Doesn't fucking matter. Maybe we could make things equal by law. Sorry to sound like such a fucking leftist, but maybe things should be equal under law. That is a knife, and that is a gun, and that is a penis, and that is a vagina. Can we do that? Is that a thing? I don't fucking know.
Well, I know one thing. Given the data that shows the, I don't like to cite the alleged vampire effect because I don't believe in it. But what I do notice is that if you commit violence against a child and then raise that child in a violent environment, that child is more likely to grow up to use violence instead of diplomacy and camaraderie in their interactions with other people, right? And when you look at the histories of people who are sexual assault perpetrators, you find that they were sexual assault victims at a much higher rate than the general population. So if you don't want perpetration, like, stop diddling kids. That in particular needs to be said to women, school teachers in particular, because if you look at the histories of men who are convicted, they've got a really high rate of being victimized by women when they were young. So there's that. But it goes on. National data regarding convictions and trials is incredibly difficult to find if the data is tracked at all. Many victims are assaulted by the same person, but reliable statistics on repeat offenders aren't available. So how do they know that? If there's no reliable... Like, the one study that does really demonstrate that, there's a Navy study that... I think it was a Navy study. No, it was the Marines. And I have it somewhere. That in which like 13% of the respondents admitted to violent criminal behavior, including sexual assault behavior, and then there was the Lissac study that he really screwed up how he drew conclusions based on his data, and his data is a little questionable, but his study. One thing that you can actually reliably take from his study is that rape is an abnormal behavior that is usually committed by career criminals, not your average person, and that they are usually repeat offenders. About 4% of the population that are all repeat offenders, at least in terms of male perpetrated rape. About 4% of the male population is responsible, like 4 to 6% is responsible for 90-some% of rapes. Real small percentage of perpetrators with abnormal characteristics. And like, that tells you something. He interpreted that for some reason to mean that there was a epidemic of rape on university campuses. But the data that he had didn't show that. It was just sort of something that he, like, well, I want to say this, so I'm going to say it. And that was it. But, so here we have this data, this non-data data that could be based on a lot of incidents that happened, that men tolerated happening to them and didn't report to the police because they didn't think of themselves as victims at the time. Being used to claim that men are getting away with raping women left and right. And here we have this claim that, this may be a lot of repeat offenders, and national data is hard to find. We can't really prove this, but we're going to say the statistics themselves are always in flux, and the data shifts year to year. But one thing is certain. The United States is bad at prosecuting sexual assault. So they just hedged the fuck out of this. There's no validity to the claim that they're about to make here, based on the things they've said so far. But then they go on and say, and when less than 1% of assaults, and again, we're going to say allegations, lead to any repercussions, more violent criminals walk free. So how do we get better at prosecuting sexual assault? We need to change how we treat sexual victims. Okay, so what's the change? What do they deem a sexual assault victim? At every stage in the judicial process, an undercurrent of disbelief, distrust, and mistreatment toward victims makes it less likely that rapists are prosecuted for their crimes.
Like 50 years ago, people used to complain about male teachers with their mortarboards and their Scottish accents. And their, hey, teacher, leave them kids alone. But honestly, the worst they were doing was, bullying them through social means. much like as illustrated by Pink Floyd and The Wall and such. Oh, the boy fancies himself a poet, and he would point his fucking cane at the student and say, "You think you're good for anything, laddie?" And people would complain about that shit, and that's all well and good. But at this point, we've reached this situation where those hard ass male teachers have been all but ejected from the school system, and now we're left with these women. And I'm sure some of them are still trying to do their job as they're supposed to do it. But we're also left with these women who will... I mean, do I even need to finish this sentence? You all know what I'm talking about,
who
don't
will
you?
tell the class that they can't have any pudding if they don't eat their tuna?
If only that was all they were doing.
Yeah,
at this point, they're saying, you need to cut your dick off, or you can't have any pudding.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's definitely gone to a place that nobody ever would have expected when we first started talking about sexual perpetration among female teachers. Now they're brainwashing students into self-sterilization. Very strange situation.
And it's not like these teachers are doing it necessarily in order to sexually assault them themselves. It's like Komodo dragons. I feel like I said this in some streams some time ago. The thing about Komodo dragons is they don't bite the organism that they intend on feeding on. They bite an organism knowing that some other Komodo dragons somewhere down the line will eat it when it's dead.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. It doesn't happen through conspiracy. It happens just through this organic process that this evolutionary process that as long as there's enough of them biting these children and giving them this insipid
they're giving them a crippling mental health condition. That's
what
they're inflicting upon them.
Giving them these diseases, not so that they can sexually assault them, but so that someone else down the line can sexually assault them
or exploit them in some other way.
So it's not a conspiracy theory. It's an organic process. That the whole reason that this exists is because it's happened so gradually. That as long as someone is fucking up these children down the line, someone else in the same with the same theory of mind can actually rape them further down the line, and it just keeps going because it's able to just roll this over from the front and the back. And it just keeps going because it keeps working, because it has this front end and this back end that is able to make this happen, and because there's no opposition to this. And this is why Komodo dragons were able to evolve to this state. And it's the same reason these evil cunts have been able to evolve to this state, albeit on a much shorter, temporal plan. Not that it's even a plan, it's just it happens organically. And this has happened organically because not enough of us have been here to say, hey, this is what's happening. Because there have been other woke assholes to say, no, this isn't happening. This couldn't possibly happen. How dare you say this is happening? This is sorry.
It's all right. But going on with the article, this thing about disbelief, distrust, and mistreatment, all right, that claim relates to the investigation process looking for evidence in all directions. So an accusation has to be treated as just an accusation until there is evidence. And if there is no evidence, then it is appropriate for the investigating officer to treat the accusation as potentially false. It is potentially true and potentially false until there is evidence one way or another. Absence of evidence that the allegation is true can be taken by an investigator as evidence that it is false. So that's the first step. Now, it's not enough evidence to prosecute somebody for making a false allegation, right? But it is enough evidence to start examining the details of the allegation for holes, like the accuser in the Rolling Stone article that claimed that she was thrown onto a pile of glass and gang raped and then didn't have injuries from the glass. And of course the accused boys who would have been slamming their body parts into the glass, they didn't have any injuries either. Like, the injuries would have been horrific there, right? And obviously that's a big hole in the allegation right there. But yeah, they're objecting to investigating those issues with allegations. They're objecting to the idea that police might demonstrate any skepticism at all and act on that skepticism by actually checking into, like, is this possible? Did the thing that, does the accused have the capacity to commit the crime? Was the accused somewhere else when the crime took place? Well, is it possible that the accuser made the crime up? Right? You can't ask those questions, even when it's evident that those questions should be asked, because that's mistreatment. That's disbelief, distrust, skepticism is not allowed. Right? That's what they're saying here. So then you have the next paragraph. Let's start with reporting the crime. No crime will ever be investigated unless police know about it. A point I made earlier. The Justice Department puts the percentage of rapes and sexual assaults reported at between 20% and 40% as the number fluctuates each year. And again, I will point out, I will bet whatever the percentage is, let's say we take the middle of that and say 30%. If 30% of rapes and other sexual assaults are reported, and they lump that all together, that includes things that, again, women report based on subjective evidence that they've drawn conclusions on. Like, rape is not subjective, but groping can be. And sexual harassment can be too. Right? That's very subjective. So 30%, probably the majority of that 30% is women reporting incidents. And if you're lumping those things together, the stat no longer can be applied as part of the determining statistics on how frequently rape leads to a conviction. Because we're talking about, like, how many unreported sexual assaults are made up of things like somebody just reports being or respondent reports on the survey being groped, when in fact maybe somebody bumped into them or tripped into them, or they were in a crowded place and just thought they were groped. How many of those reports are incidents where two people engaged in drunk sex when they were not too intoxicated to appraise their actions, but the woman reporting it on the survey exaggerates her level of drunkenness in the survey, right? How many of those are things that men don't complain about when they happen and women do? It really doesn't make sense. Reporting a sexual assault can be traumatic. The process of reporting is inherently invasive when your body is the scene of the crime. Victims who report immediately after the assault undergo a SANE exam. It's sexual assault nurse examination. So it's kind of like calling the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey the NISVS survey. It's the survey and the exam. Performed by a sexual assault nurse examiner, in which the nurses photograph the victim's body and collect evidence from their genitals. Recounting the experience means reliving the worst moment of your life in front of strangers. Rape victims often feel ashamed or they blame themselves for what happened. And talking about the assault is incredibly difficult. There's where this depends on the nature of the assault. Like, if you were drunk out of your gourd and you had sex with somebody and you feel like you were too drunk to consent, too drunk to appraise your actions, but you weren't incapacitated, like, you might be questioning things. But if somebody beats the fuck out of you and holds you down and does things to your body against your will, you're not ashamed of that. You don't blame yourself for that. You blame them. And it's cathartic to say, this person did this bad thing to me and I'm angry about it.
Aside from anything else, it is true that the average male has greater capacity for processing alcohol than does the average woman. Now, obviously, you can slice this apart when it comes to women who are more used to alcohol and women and men who are less used to alcohol, and it all depends on body mass, which is not just a male-female thing. It's a fat muscle thing.
Well, there's a whole bunch of factors that go into it: body mass, kidney health, metabolism, like your liver health. All those things can affect like how you process alcohol and how it affects you.
Yeah, so if a man does challenge you to drink the same amount of alcohol as he does, like in that scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, then it doesn't matter if the alcohol you're drinking is the wine that his family grew up with. It comes down to body mass and the constitution of your body mass. But this is one of the many reasons women should be wary of men who try to do this, who try to act as though, as a woman, you should be just as capable of handling your alcohol as a man is. But it's not necessarily the case because of the weight and height and body mass index and such. And to that degree, I dare say women need to be more wary than men are. On average, obviously, only on average. Like if you're a tiny man who's not used to his alcohol, then you need to be worried about a woman who challenges you to drink the same amount of alcohol that she does. But
when it really comes down to it, we really, in the United States in particular, we have a really bad approach to discussing alcohol with kids. And because of this, we have a really bad phenomenon of kids using alcohol as a form of rebellion against authority instead of just a thing that, sometimes people drink. Like, when I talked to my kids about it, I didn't do any of the moralizing that people usually do in regard to alcohol. I talked about other things. Like, when you're young, your kidneys are still developing, your liver's still developing. This substance is technically a poison. There's a small amount of it you can ingest. The amount makes the poison, right? There's a small amount of it you can ingest once your liver and kidneys are developed enough to handle it. That is relaxing, and then there's a slight larger amount that is a little too relaxing. And then beyond that, you start to experience symptoms of poisoning, like you get intoxicated, really seriously intoxicated, you get dizzy, you get a little nauseous, and eventually it'll make you throw up. It'll make you unable to control your body well enough to prevent yourself from inhaling your vomit. There's a lot of other risks. You may make stupid decisions after, and drinking too much of it, and it does damage to your body. So if you decide you're going to use alcohol, you should wait until you're through your adolescence, at least far enough through that you pretty well got good developed kidneys and liver, and do it in moderation so that you're not damaging yourself. And in particular, my son, like, our family has some genetics that you really have to watch out for addiction. And, like, we have some family heritage that says we're more likely to become addicted to alcohol. So moderation is even more important in that instance, because it's a lot easier to quit something that you're doing a little than it is to quit something that you're doing a shitload. And so there's that. We can't have as much fun as everybody else with substances. That's okay. We got other things we can do, right? If you talk to your kids about it like that, then they are not going to treat it as something to use to rebel against you. They're going to think of it as something that they have to judge for themselves and be careful with. Don't be stupid. Like, honestly, you don't see a lot of people running around in the streets hitting themselves in the head with a 20-pound sledgehammer going, isn't this fun? Man, I'm having a blast. Bam! Right in the skull. No, because they know that hurts. They know it looks stupid. They know it sounds stupid. But, like, with alcohol, it's the same effect. If you get plowed every week, go out and get blasted, and then do stupid shit and wake up with a hangover the next day. The only thing is, it just takes a little bit longer, and you're swallowing something instead of hitting yourself in the head with a 20-pound sledge.
It's worth pointing out at this point that my family is particularly susceptible to having their dicks cut off, and their breasts cut off and inverted into the opposite.
That's not fun.
Do you see what satirical point I'm making? We're not going to be able to explain to future generations how susceptible our families are to.
Yeah, no, you won't, because although I actually could say that about my family now that I think about it. I'm not going to tell that story. That's too brutal of a story, honestly.
Dang.
Yeah.
Hannah likes telling us stories about her family.
Not this one. You guys do not.
But she's not telling us this one.
You guys
that
do not
should tell you everything.
This story.
That should tell you everything you need
bad.
to know.
Yeah, that's the one. That's awful. That's an awful situation. But no. And it's sad. But yeah. In any case, my point on this is, like, the way we handle alcohol has created a situation where young women endanger themselves and the young men they hang out with in a number of ways, including, allegations of sexual assault and sexual assault affecting the young men, who then have no recourse because our society views alcohol-facilitated sexual assault as something men do, not something women do, right? And then on top of that, and I think I've told this story before, but one of my childhood friends was much older than me, friend of the family, somebody who I maintained friendship with as I grew into adulthood until he moved away. Got married, moved away, started working and stuff. But he was the son of the fire chief the police chief, son of the police chief, when I was in school. And so he had CPR training, he had a bunch of, understanding of things that the rest of us really hadn't had to think about because we were just kids. Like, he had a little less of being just a kid than the rest of us, because his dad was a cop and he was the chief of police and everything. Goes to a party, and he was reticent because he didn't want to get caught at an alcohol party, which is like the majority of parties that happen in my area. So, he goes, walks in, sees that, yeah, everybody's in here getting drunk. Okay, I'll see you guys later. I'll hang out with you sometime when everybody's not getting drunk, because if I get caught here, it's not going to look good for my dad. Goes to his car, and he's on his way there. He sees one of his friends, one of his classmates, is slumped over the steering wheel in her car. And, he's trying to get in the car, and or he's trying to get her attention in the car. She's not responding when he bangs on the window and stuff. And finally, he opens the door, and she just falls out. And she has no pulse. And so he starts yelling for help and starts CPR. And, this is in the 80s. This isn't like, you can't just call 911. There is no 911 back then. So a bunch of drunk teenagers had to go back in the house, find the list of emergency phone numbers, identify the number for an ambulance for the squad, and call them. So he did CPR for something like 15 or 20 minutes, half an hour maybe, before the emergency services arrived. And of course, once the adults were there to help this girl, and she survived. But once the adults were there to help this girl, he made himself scarce so that he wasn't getting caught at an alcohol party. But she had drunk a bunch of like Jello shots and other things. It wasn't just a little bit of beer. She'd try to keep up with the boys, and it all hit her system at once, and she just like had her whole everything stopped. Right? And that's in the 80s. Like, that's happening a lot more today, because girls are just thinking, well, I can do anything the boys can do. Well, if he weighs 230 pounds and you weigh 130 pounds, the number of drinks it takes to kill you is much smaller than the number of drinks it takes to kill him, and maybe smaller than the number of drinks it takes to get him drunk. And if he's drinking like 5.5 proof beer, and you're drinking some fruity drink that has rum in it, that has like Bacardi 151 in it, you're going to get drunk a lot faster. So, like, this is another problem. Like, girls drink higher alcohol content drinks with a lot of sugar in them that disguise the alcohol and make it difficult for them to notice how quickly they're imbibing. It's very dangerous. So that, like, all of that's, going on. But, back to the...
Okay, sorry.
I was going to say, back to the alleged trauma of reporting a sexual assault. All right, well, reporting any assault is traumatic. I mean, having someone not automatically believe you in a moment like that might be traumatic. I had a report being assaulted in 2019, not a sexual assault. I just got punched a bunch of times and thrown on the floor and thrown into a wall and stuff because I wouldn't hit her back. And this was a dumb situation, and it was an embarrassing situation, and the most traumatic thing about it was that it happened in an environment where nobody should be expected to behave that way. So it was embarrassing to report the crime because I had to admit that somebody in that environment behaved that way, and I failed at diplomacy so badly that I let a conflict get to that point. And so that was embarrassing. But I reported it anyway. And then I got falsely charged. But I don't feel bad about reporting it. Right? And I don't think that would necessarily stop me from, if somebody breaks into my house and steals from me, reporting that. I would have to go through a situation where they arrested me for reporting a theft in my own home by a stranger, like before I start saying, you shouldn't report any crimes to the police. And this idea that we should stop thoroughly investigating an allegation and viewing it as potentially true and potentially false until there's evidence one way or another, because cops can make mistakes, is bullshit. I would rather go through what I went through than be able to report that somebody did something to me and with no evidence get them convicted because the cops didn't question that. Because then there would be somebody that would be subject to state violence and incarceration who did nothing wrong. Many police departments exacerbate this problem when they misunderstand the role that trauma plays in a victim's behavior. When investigators aren't trained in trauma-informed practices, they might use interrogation tactics on victims, which only makes the process more traumatizing. The specter of the false rape allegation looms large for victims and police. Now, that's not melodramatic or anything. Victims who fail to report often say they didn't expect to be believed, and many who do report find that they weren't. One detective told The Atlantic that he thought 8 out of every 10 cases he investigated were false. But they haven't asked the investigator why he thinks that, have they?
He's obviously a misogynist.
Misogyny! How common are false allegations really? No one knows for sure, but all of the research suggests they're rare. Now, remember this line. Remember this sentence, okay? It says here in this sentence, all. All is an absolute term. It means no exceptions. All of the research suggests they're rare, according to this sentence in this paragraph. Next paragraph, right? The consensus among academic research seems to be that 2 to 10% of reports are false. Some studies say as high as 40% or 90%. What happened to all of the research? What happened to no exceptions? If some studies say 40% or 90%, now they're at most of the available literature puts the figure much lower.
The consensus says that the sun revolves around the earth. How very dare you, Hannah?
I know. I look at this like, all right. So when they say consensus, now remember who we mentioned in the previous study that was incorrectly reported by the researcher in terms of what the conclusions of that study was. Like he reported a study that showed that rape is a rare behavior among men, that actually only about 6% of the male population might be responsible for 95% of rape or something like that, and they're repeat offenders, they're career criminals, they're not your normal guy, there's something wrong with them, right, that do this. So your normal average guy is not a threat. And he took that research that showed that and used it to report that there was an epidemic of serial rape on university campuses, right? David Lissack was the head researcher on that case. So when we click on consensus, let's right-click on consensus and open the link that is their evidence that 2% to 10% of allegations are false and no more. And here we have, dun dun dun, oh gosh, look who it is! It's David Lissack. Gee, we should really trust this research, shouldn't we, guys? We should definitely trust the conclusions because he has a history of drawing great conclusions from his research.
I mean, it's the government and they're here to help you, Hannah. Don't you know? They love us. You're here to help.
Yeah. You know, honestly, I don't know that he's involved in the government, but I do know that he's feminist. He's a feminist researcher. And one of the issues that I have with this, and Karen's discussed this, I wish she was on tonight, because this is a point that she's made before, and I'm not going to make it as well as she does. But the studies that minimize the number of false allegations, the ones that feminists like to emphasize, they don't have the same standard for measuring whether an allegation is false or not as studies that come up with around 40 to 65% of allegations being false. I don't know about the standard for the 90% study. I would be interested in finding that out as well. But in order to get that 2 to 10%, what they do is they severely limit how an allegation can be investigated for falsehood. And they limit it to the point where if a woman doesn't, come in banging pots and pans and scream, "It was false! I made the whole thing up! Ha 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 ha!" It's not false. All right, even if they're not allowed to investigate for holes in the story. They're not allowed to look for evidence of falsehood, unless, maybe the victim comes in with exculpatory evidence that doesn't have anything to do with consent. For instance, like 7 Years in Hell guy with the video that showed he was somewhere else at the time. She said he was raping her. Those are instances that they'll accept as false. But instances where, for instance, she says this happened and he can't prove he wasn't there, he can't prove what did or didn't happen, and even if he says it didn't happen, he can't exonerate himself. They can't go through and look for, was there a complete lack of evidence in the case that, she couldn't prove sex happened at all. There was no DNA, there was no witness, there was no nothing, and it's just he said, she said. He said, she said cases are all treated as not false. So they can confirm beyond a reasonable doubt that 2 to 10% of reports are false. And they can confirm beyond a reasonable doubt that 1% of allegations of sexual assault in general are true. Maybe, because some of those allegations, there are false convictions too. So maybe less than 1%. We would say maybe that 8/10 might be closer.
Meanwhile, they're saying most rapists are not convicted.
Right.
Which you might respond to by saying, well, if they weren't convicted, then surely that means they're confirmed as not rapists, which surely would include them in the percentage of people who were accused of rape but were not in fact rapists, which would make them false accusations.
Well,
would it not?
Yeah, one thing that you can say 100% for certain, right? Like, say we know for a fact that we can confirm beyond a reasonable doubt that 2 to 10% of reports are false. And we can confirm beyond a reasonable doubt that some percentage less than 1% are true. So if we apply that to the unknown, because let's maximize that to 10%. That means that 89% are unknown. The likelihood is that at least 10% of those are false. And those that are unreported to police, at least 10% of those are also false. We can only confirm that less than 1% of those are true, and the remainder there, again, becomes questionable, murky. That's the main thing that we can draw from this, is that most reports are unverifiable, unverified, and unverifiable. So when feminists say that 1% of rapes lead to a conviction, they are lying. What they can truthfully say is that less than 1% of rape allegations are ever verified. And that may not even be true because they're counting all sexual assault as one thing, whether it's rape or not. So less than 1% of all sexual assault allegations are verifiable, with an unknown, the caveat that an unknown percentage of those are rape.
But this doesn't take into account. This doesn't take into account all of the women who were unreportedly raped by men. Let's just not take into account all the men who were unreportedly raped by women. That's not a thing, as we've already covered.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if they report it or not, because it's not a thing that's even recognized by law. So the unreported counts towards the women, but not towards the men. And so this does the thing I want it to do, but it doesn't do the thing I do not want it to do. As such, whoop, 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 whoop.
It's if that wasn't bad enough, now let's get to the real irony here. All right, so we have just gone through all of this article, like, oh, it's really bad. A bunch of rape happens that isn't getting convicted. It's epidemic of unreported, unprosecuted rape. Blah 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 blah. Hello, what does the next paragraph say here? The next paragraph says, it's important to note that every study I could find analyzing false reports relied on what percentage of reports were marked false by police, not the number of people successfully prosecuted for filing false reports. There aren't any national requirements for what constitutes a false report, and there aren't any oversight or appeals processes if police label a report false. So what she's saying there is, if police don't label a report false, if there are not successful prosecutions, it's not a false report. Can we apply that standard to rape? I think they get mad if we apply that standard to rape. If police don't prosecute a rape, if police don't mark a rape verified, and there's not a successful prosecution, meaning a conviction, right, then it wasn't a rape. Because that would mean that 99.2% of allegations are false. By the standard she sets for measuring false allegations, if we measure sexual assault by that same standard, 99.2% of allegations are false. Is that what they want?
Shit, we really need to change men to women.
That would fix the problem. Where we look at men answering questions about their sexual violence, about 10% of women overall admit to using coercive and violent strategies to obtain sex against the will of the victim. And they're not women with criminal histories, necessarily. It's a pretty sad statement. Still, there's a persistent idea in American society that it's common for women to lie about being raped. False reports do happen, and when they do, they go viral. And why? No, they don't. Most false reports never get discussed in public at all. When they go viral, it's usually because somebody tried to make a news story out of the alleged rape, and then it falls apart. But she goes on, and why not? The stories tend to be really interesting. Take, for example, the Duke Lacrosse case or the Rolling Stone article. We can all think of an example of a false report that became a media sensation, but the amount of coverage given to false rape allegations can make them seem far more common than they actually are, creating an atmosphere of mistrust for victims and police. It's sort of sus how often an allegation that news media attempts to make hay with falls apart, isn't it? Like, do they just cherry pick the false allegations to make a big deal out of, and they're ignoring the more credible rape allegations? Is that what's happening? Like, are journalists just trying to make allegations look false? Are they trying to destroy the public opinion of women? Is that what it is? Or are they stupid, maybe? Like, they can't tell the difference, and so they get taken for a ride every time, and they're like, oh, this is a big deal, and then it turns out to be a false allegation? Or is it maybe indicative of how frequently false allegations happen? Like, I would ask that question to the journalist, you know?
This is what pisses me off about every other area of this oikophobia we're talking about. It's been happening with women versus men for the last 100 years. But so many of us in this sphere of influence are focused on, look how much white people are being attacked. Look how much straight people are being attacked. Look how much cis people are being attacked. And they're not going to fix anything because they're not looking at where it all originated, which is the degree to which men are being attacked. I mean, like, yes, it's developed to this point that none of us ever thought it would be developed. The oikophobic point that the West would inevitably develop this. Not just fuck men, but fuck white people, fuck cis people, fuck straight people. But it all started with fuck men.
Yep.
And I just wish people could see where it all came from, because otherwise you're just addressing the symptoms rather than the cause. This is the cause, folks. Misandry is the word for it. I don't want to reduce it to identity politics, but this is not an identity. It's a poison. Misandry is it's not an identity. It's a poison, and it's the poison that has existed in our society since 100 years ago, at the very least, and it's where all the other poisons came from. Because y'all just accepted this particular poison. Yeah, of course men oppress women. Of course men rape women. Of course men sexually assault women. Why wouldn't they? Yeah, it makes all sense. And yeah, of course white people oppress black people. Yeah, wait, what? No, fucking, this is where it started. Like, your own people oppress the other people. The very idea that you considered women to be the other people is where it all started. Women aren't the other people, and you know it. Women are the people, just as much as men are the people. The moment you started considering women to be the other people was where it all started going wrong. Because you know they're not. In no given society, anywhere in history or geography, were women ever the other people. But you got on board with this, I don't know what adjective to call it, but this idea that women are the other people, the oppressed people. It's where it all started.
Yeah. And I honestly, I'd go with a noun, because it's more of a lie than anything. Like, that there's some difference between men and women that makes us almost like two different species. Like, we have differences that give us different strengths and different weaknesses, different vulnerabilities, different needs. But that's a small percentage of what we are, and the majority of what a human being is the same for both sexes. And when it comes to natural rights, for instance, bodily autonomy, the right to pursue your own welfare, and so on, the right to be non-interfered with, right? The right to life, that doesn't differ between the sexes. And what we've ended up with in a situation, or in the modern situation, is this belief that places men beneath women, women above men. We have this presumption of othering, and we have a presumption of two tiers of value and two tiers of personality, I guess, character, where women are treated like they're better than men, and women are treated like they're more ethical than men, which is the reverse might actually be true because men are more accountable. In society, like other people hold men more accountable than they hold women. Like that, even without the internal accountability, men can't get away with things that women can get away with, right? But we also treat women like they're more important, and it's not even natural. And at some point, I'm going to do a longer discussion about that. That the idea of natural gynocentrism is bullshit. It never existed. There has never been natural gynocentrism. There's been a dedication to children, to preserving children. Men and women have taken roles around preserving children, and women's role as a utilitarian role in protecting and producing, protecting and preserving, and then mentoring children, right, has given women an advantage in being prioritized. But it's not because they're women. It's because they've fulfilled the role of giving birth, nursing, nurturing, and being the direct, like the immediate shield for children, where men have taken the role of providing, protecting the family and the household, and being the satellite shield for children. Their mentoring was a little different as well, right? But that doesn't translate into women being valued because they're women. It translates into women being valued because of what they do for children. So it's child-centric. It's gene-centric. Those things are natural. But it is not natural to place women at a higher value than men because they're women. That's entirely artificial. It's entirely propagated by social attitudes and intentions of women in general, exploitation by women. And men don't have to put up with it forever. It can be cured, it can be corrected, and it should be. And our society has the right, men have the right, to demand that it is cured and work toward that end. So that's something that I know that there are going to be people that are going to disagree strongly with me on this, but I challenge you to cite any evidence that doesn't go back to childbirth, child nurturing, and child protection.
Well, the great irony of all of this is that women are naturally xenophobic, and if anything, men are naturally oikophobic. Now, this goes against a lot of what I've been trying to say for a lot of the time, but women are gatherers. Women are people who strengthen the home, the hearth, the family, and men are the people who venture beyond the home to hunt and to expand and so forth. So it stands to reason that that men are interested in that which exists beyond the familiar, and women are interested in that which exists within the home. And so it's that's how ironic it is that all of this comes about because human beings are so intelligent, the most intelligent species that's ever existed on Earth. We're able to the reason we were able to get this far is because despite our nature, we're able to look beyond that which we are naturally drawn. We are able to look to that which even contradicts our nature, And I think that's how we were able to get this far, because we're able to look beyond our nature and balance our nature against not nature. And this is why, after all the developments we were able to make technologically and so on and so forth, despite women's oikophobia, women looked beyond their nature and looked towards xenophobia. And despite men's nature, they were able to look beyond their oikophobia and look to... Wait, I should have written this down before I talk. This is why I script things before I talk. But I hope you can get what I'm saying. And that's the reason I confused myself, is because it's all very confusing.
Well, I guess
that,
one thing I can point out is, you look at peacetime versus wartime, and you look at women's tendency when you talk about xenophobia and oikophobia and men's and women's different ways of handling resources. Women have a tendency to amass resources. Men have a tendency to focus on the production of resources. So men will team up to produce a larger amount of resources to create plenty for all. Women will hoard resources to the detriment of others. And that sort of... I'll just give you my theory on so-called male violence in the middle of this. I don't think it exists. There is no such thing as violence that is uniquely male. There is violence that is perpetrated by males. Much of it is done on behalf of women. War happens for the purpose of hoarding resources. That's a feminine behavior. It's something that women direct. It's something that men do in response to women's direction. And if hoarding resources did not make men attractive to women, men would not do it, because they produce instead. They increase production. They team up for that purpose, and they trade for that purpose. Right? So I don't think that you can count war as something uniquely male, even though the people who are forced into it are always poor and minority men. Right? Not upper class men necessarily, but poor men, not women. Right? And similarly, criminal violence, interpersonal criminal violence, usually revolves around the acquisition of resources, not the production of resources, the acquisition of resources. When it does result around the production of resources, it's usually in relation to a type of resource that women have demanded a safety net that resulted in outlawing that particular resource or outlawing that particular type of business, like drugs. Like all the drug laws, all the alcohol laws, all the blue laws, those are at the behest of women. Women are the ones that come along and say, gosh, we got to do something about this, pass a law. Men just condemn other men for engaging in it and don't do business with them. Like, they exclude them. Like, all right, this guy's useless, we're not going to deal with him. Or they rescue them from it by taking them out of circumstance and not letting them have access. But they don't pass laws. Well, they pass laws, but they don't demand laws. Women demand laws. So all of that goes back to this division. You want to get rid of this phenomenon that people think is natural, this gynocentric phenomenon, this alien behavior of women's demand to be treated in society as if they are more valuable than men. You have to get women to start being producers of resources and being able to team up to increase the supply of resources rather than hoarding resources in order to, preserve themselves at the expense of the next person, the next family, the next community, the next country. It's just a psychological change. It's not a change of nature necessarily. It's a change of behavior. It's a change of the way people think.
But women will always be a source of resources in terms of the next generation. They will always be the ones who get sorry, I'm hiccuping. The ones who get pregnant and produce the next generation. And this is why so many worldviews have resulted to the idea that women's burden on the species is to produce new people. And so since women produce new people, men have to do something else. And we see this as a problem because this is what Hitler used to say. Well, women's burden is that they produce new people. And so men's burden is that they fight wars.
Yeah.
And so I guess we have to figure out how that's wrong. And we have to figure it out while I stop hiccuping.
I hate when I get the hiccups. It's actually painful for me when I get the hiccups. I don't know if it's like that for everybody else, but it feels like somebody's punching me in the gut every single time.
Yeah,
and the back and the chest. Like, that sucks.
I get that too.
But speaking of hiccups, I got to work tonight. That's completely unrelated. So what I think we're going to do is, our last thing that we read was, but the amount of coverage given to false rape allegations can make them seem far more common than they actually are, creating an atmosphere of mistrust for victims and police. We're going to come back next week to that point and continue the article from there. And I think we're going to continue discussing this issue. There's A Voice for Men article. It's not a new article, but it is about the experience of the male experience of sexual violence and how much more common it is than people think. So I think I want to follow this article up with that one. We might get to the point where we start that article next week. But I think we're gonna do maybe a little series on this, because this claim is based on misrepresenting a host of issues around the topic of sexual misconduct. So you can look forward to that next week. We'll continue discussing this Dallas Morning News article, and then possibly get into the fact that actually male victims of female violence may outnumber female victims of male violence significantly, and that includes sexual violence. There's an article on A Voice for Men in regard to the prison rape situation as well that I want to look at. So I think that's probably where we're headed for the next few weeks. So you guys understand, like, we're not quitting the middle of the article and then just going to come back and read the rest of the article and then go on to some other subject the following week. I think this topic is really important to get a handle on. Feminists lie about a lot of things in regard to this. But we can conclude, at least at this point in the article, that everything else they're going to say, all the recommendations they're going to make, are based on a false premise. It's not true that less % of rapes lead to a conviction. They've cobbled together a bunch of different types of data that they've misrepresented as rape data in order to make that claim. So from there, we'll go on to next week. I don't think I have any super chats here. Let me double check. Going all the way back, I have not seen a single super chat come through, which that's fine. I'd rather see them come through our system anyway. So I'm gonna skip from the super chats. We'll take a look at the super chows. I might start looking at those first anyway. Let's see here. Scroll. We have an enormous Discord. Like, it seems like every time I come in here, it's bigger than it was the last time. I know it's not, but it feels like it. Okay. Let me see here. We have... You can read this one on the next show. I have something I'm going to have to look at. I can't click on the original message here. It just takes me to my freaking profile. What the fuck?
I can see
Discord.
the super chows.
Yeah, I can see the super chows. There's a message from Doge that says you can read this one on the next show, but I don't know which one it's referring to because it's not taking me like to the original message when I... Okay, there we go.
It's... Yep.
Okay, so I guess there we go. There's the next one. I hit done, and then somebody commented. All right, so there we go. HBR Talk 258, catching up slowly. I think I missed this one. This was like 2 shows ago, or longer. Laws that prevent people from collecting rainwater never made sense. And in other news, the sun rose today. California's rationale was that if people collected rainwater, that water would not be able to return to the water cycle, so various natural resources or sources of water would not be replenished. I'm actually going to relate this to today's story. This was anonymously given too, because it doesn't give the person a name. This says bot, but it doesn't say. Like usually we have a name, but it says people have to use water, and their wastewater as it goes somewhere. This wastewater is not treated and returned to nature. 2, if people do not collect rainwater, they would just be pulling water in from the other water sources. True. This water would be taken out from the natural water cycle. If people were allowed to collect rainwater, they would have never taken water from those other sources. 3, people cannot collect an unlimited amount of rain. Their personal water storage would have eventually topped off, and any excess would have returned to the natural bodies of water. California law currently allows people to collect only rainwater that falls on their roofs. That's insane. But yeah, California claims that the water wouldn't be able to return to the water cycle. They don't know what they're talking about.
Well, that's California for you. They really, the people in charge are just completely inept at their jobs. And God, I love California, but I am so glad I'm out of there.
Right. So there's 2 types of interpersonal violence law. There's interpersonal violence law that criminalizes interpersonal violence on the basis of the injury to the victim, that the victim has a right to their bodily autonomy, their bodily integrity, and the perpetrator is violating their right. Right? The other type that has existed throughout time is property damage. Right? That if the victim of interpersonal violence is treated as the property of an upper class person, a wealthier person, so an indentured servant, a slave, for the longest time children, that was treated as an offense against the owner, right? And that means it was an offense against the use of the resource. The person is a resource. Right? All other forms of interpersonal violence, where free men are concerned, they're just lumped in together. Like you're victimizing the individual. You're preventing the individual from pursuing happiness. You're preventing the individual from being a whole, healthy person, right? Causing harm. Well, when you look at rape, right, feminists like to keep rape as a female experienced male perpetrated crime. But why would it be significantly different from any other form of interpersonal violence? You're looking at damage to the person. You're looking at violating their bodily autonomy. You're looking at violating their human right to bodily autonomy and bodily integrity. That's not gendered. Every human being has that right, regardless of whether they're male or female, old or young, big or tall, short or small. Doesn't matter. Right? You only have a difference in the right to bodily autonomy and integrity versus something like property damage if you're looking at something that is owned by another person, or that another person is responsible for. Like when you damage somebody's child, you're damaging somebody who's helpless that the parents are responsible for. When you injure a child, you're committing a crime against two people. And when you injure a servant, you're committing a crime against the owner. As a slave, you're committing a crime against the owner. So either feminists are arguing that women should own men, or men should own women, and rape should be treated as a crime against the owner, and or they're arguing that women are pets and children, and men are responsible for them, and rape should be treated as a crime against the caregiver. They're not smart enough to figure out that women are not public property, that women are, if you want bodily autonomy, you must be independent, and that, therefore, a crime like sexual assault is a crime against the person's right to bodily integrity and bodily autonomy, and it cannot be gendered. Just a point. The rainwater thing made me think about it, because the rationale that California is engaging in is with water cycle is that water is public property, that the natural resource is public property, right? And gendering sexual violence treats women as public property. Exactly the opposite of what women, at least feminists, want women to be, right? Except when it benefits them. So, Meredith G gave us $5. HBR News 405. Wait, those are Brian's. Doo-doo-doo. We are looking at mainframe, maintaining frame. Okay, here we go. Meredith G gave us $5 and said, HBR Talk 261, honey for the badgers. Thanks for the interesting conversation. Have to check out early due to an early morning, and we'll catch later. And that's our super chow. And I can't find my tab with Rumble. I just gotta look and double check. There it is. Oh, it's because Rumble is blue now. Freaking, they gotta change everything. And there are no paid Rumble rants, but Mangaka92 pointed out right away, less than 1% of sexual assaults lead to a conviction, or 1% of sexual assault allegations lead to a conviction. Exactly the point. They got that wrong. Let's see. All of the studies show that yes, Mangaka. All of the studies show that most of the studies agree. And that's the other one. And consensus is useful, but it's not ironclad. It's never been ironclad, and it'll never be ironclad. So there you go. All right.
Like people are looking at the idea that most scientists agree that this is the scientific consensus, and it's only started getting through to people in the last, dare I say, the last 3 years, that maybe the scientific consensus of what we call scientists is not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
Because of the particular things that have happened. And because we're still live on YouTube, I can't really go into what that is.
Yeah. Well, I'll be more general about it, and I can say this. All right. It's easy to claim there is a particular consensus if you are silencing anybody who dissents from the consensus. And silencing can include shaming. It can include attacks on the careers of the individuals involved. It can include just flat-out exclusion, where you say, well, when these people talk, it doesn't count. Right? And it can even include threats and intimidation, and various other means of making a person decide that it's not worth the risk to speak out. And we've seen that in another area. We've seen that in domestic violence victims advocacy, right? And Murray Strauss talked about that. This isn't even new. Like, this is now decades ago that he noticed this and started reporting on it, and his whole career was wrecked by it, and everybody that has discussed his findings is shamed for discussing his findings. So, like, we're talking decades of feminist manipulation of consensus in order to be able to claim consensus it goes their way, in order to be able to shame people into compliance with it. So just because the word consensus gets used doesn't necessarily mean that you have arrived at fact or truth. It means that further investigation is needed to determine whether consensus is accurate. And that's that way in all forms of, like, that every scientific finding, every philosophical belief, every religious belief, all forms of reformation, any type of government, any type of learning, knowledge, whatever. Consensus can be useful in decision making, but it doesn't tell you what is or is not true.
It's supremely ironic that the people who speak out against capitalism will nevertheless tell you that they won't follow where the money goes.
Yeah.
But they will nevertheless tell you the consensus of where the money goes is clearly the truth.
Yeah. Well, and now to know the type of fallacy we're talking about here, just before we take off, the name of the fallacy is argumentum ad populum. It means appeal to the people. It is a fallacious argument based on claiming that the truth of a matter is whatever the consensus is. It's whatever the most popular or common belief is. Right? Like I said, consensus isn't irrelevant. Like, scientific consensus isn't completely lacking in value. It's a tool, not a gate, I guess. And when people treat it as a tool, all right, everybody's agreeing on this. We've decided we're going to go forward based on this. That's fair. There's nothing terribly wrong with that, as long as it's not being used to shut out dissent and questioning of the wisdom of the decision being based on the consensus. But the moment it's used to do that, to shut out dissent and identify something as a fact or a truth, that's the fallacious argument. That's appeal to the people. That's argumentum ad populum. So just remember that, because you have to be able to fall back on that when you get into arguments with people and they start saying, well, you're going against the consensus. Well, so what? We're not deciding what to do next. We're talking about what's true or not. You can use it to decide what to do next, but when we're talking about whether or not something is true, consensus doesn't prove that. There you go. With that, I will thank my co-hosts for sticking out this little bit longer than usual sausage. This one's a foul sausage here, honestly. We'll thank everybody who listened. Thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.